Hi. When flying yesterday to Ukraine, I was very, very hard trying to come up with a joke about Ukrainians. I literally thought like hours, and I had none. We have jokes about our neighbors, but unfortunately not about Ukrainians, so I'm not going to start with a joke. Anyways, hardware. And hardware revolution, also known as maker movement and Internet of Things, hardware renaissance, the new revolution of hardware. Why am I speaking about the hardware and not software? So I come from land where Skype was invented. So this is my mission, to convert all believers in software into believers into the hardware. So if we look at the numbers, it's very interesting that in 2013 compared to the last year, 55% more hardware startups were created in 1 year. And 117% more investments went into the early stage hardware companies in 1 year. So it's 117% growth in 1 year. And this is in North America alone. Sorry? Sorry about that, it's a bit slow. So it all started in 2005 with Arduino board, which was the first open source, but also affordable board. And it also made a difference because how to use and program Arduino was much, much easier than any other hardware on the market at that time. So what we see today is that very many software developers are going into the hardware scene and having no fear. I'm a hardware engineer myself, and it took me 6 years in the university to study how to create hardware. And now I see people going into the business who have no idea, and they're great. They're building great business. And that's thanks to the Arduino, because they kind of made the difference in how to program hardware. That was followed by Raspberry Pi, and of course the MakerBot and 3D printing, followed by Kickstarter and the Pebble. So the Pebble break first time 10 million limit on crowdfunding. That was pretty awesome. But we're still in early adapters age. So if everybody would raise their hand who has a wearable device, like a quantified self device, you don't see many hands, right? One. Very good. Come and talk to me later. The thing is, we all hear about the hardware, but still there are not many people who are buying this stuff. Something similar with what was the beginning of the smartphones. Everybody has a smartphone now. And we predict that everybody will have some kind of wearable in next 5 years. So there's tremendous growth. By year 2020, there should be about 80 billion internet-connected devices in the world. And that means 10 per every human being in the Earth. So since now it's about 100 times less, we see there's a potential in investments. I'm not sure how to use this thing. And by 2025, there should be 100 more Apple-like companies in the world. So Apple is the most valuable hardware company right now. There should be 100 Apples in 10 years. So this is what we're looking for. We're kind of hoping to hit one of these. Now, the hardware revolution, why it happened was that the hardware got commoditized and a lot cheaper, easier to use. The connectivity got a lot easier. So it's very easy now to build something and put it online. You don't have to know all the details. You just buy a small, tiny Spark port, for example, and it takes literally only minutes to connect your hardware to the internet. It's easier prototyping, and where nowadays we see factories which are specialized on very small amounts. So it used to, none of the factories would speak to you unless your order was 10,000 pieces or 100,000. Now you can go and say, I want 100, and they actually manufacture for you. And thanks to smartphone and tablets, now we can build devices without any screens. So if there's a hardware engineers in the crowd, they know that screen is one of the biggest battery life eaters, more or less. So if you can build a device without a screen, you can last with one battery a lot longer. Nowadays we have iBeacons or Bluetooth Low Energy, where you can last with one battery for 3 years. And this is due to the fact that you don't need a screen on a device. You have it in your pocket. And of course, Kickstarter, which made it possible to launch a product without having one, raising money to actually develop a product. And also, this kind of makes the risk smaller going on a market. About me, my name is Aleksander Tõnnisson. I'm founder and CEO of Build It Hardware Accelerator. But before that, I actually had a corporate background. I worked in Germany for 5 years in one of the top engineering houses, building flight simulators for German Navy. But I got bored, so I moved back to Estonia, started my own company, outsourcing engineering, and then a year later created a hardware accelerator because we, as I say, see huge potential there. And I also go to events like this to speak, to convert people into the hardware belief. And today I have investments in more than 10 hardware companies. So what is a startup accelerator? It turns out that not everybody knows. So just a brief overview. It started around 2005 with Y Combinator. So Paul Graham, he interviewed very many startups asking, he was trying to find out what makes a difference between a successful startup and an unsuccessful startup. And it turned out it's not the money, it's the connections. So what he made, he started a Y Combinator giving founders only $15,000, which isn't a lot, but giving access to his network. And it turned out to be a very successful business. So nowadays we have a lot more accelerators in the world. Usually accelerators give money. We invest up to 20K. Usually they give you access to the mentoring. So we have 90 plus very high profile mentors in our mentor network. Being a hardware accelerator means that you need special tools. So we give them also prototyping facilities, you get the office. So this is a typical hardware accelerator. But what's interesting is that Y Combinator has been always a purely software accelerator till the last year. So in the last year, this is a tweet from Paul Graham, who's running the Y Combinator. Startups selected most likely startups to succeed. And the first two were hardware startups. So this is quite interesting because Y Combinator don't do hardware investments till the last batch. So this is what the Europe looks like in terms of accelerators. This is not only hardware, this is all the accelerators in Europe. In world, there's about 200. So there's very high competition. If you go on a platform like F6S, for example, and you look for accelerators, you get 2,000. But only 200 out of these 2,000 are real accelerators, meaning they actually give you money, they give you know-how, they help you to go to the market. Rest of 1,800, I'm not sure what they are doing. And this is what the hardware accelerator scene looks like today. If you think why isn't there a dot on Kiev, it's because of the same reason. There is a hardware accelerator here called Carrot, but their model is different from a typical accelerator model, so that's the reason. We invest into products with high speed to market like any other accelerator. That means that, for example, we do not invest into medical equipment. It takes years and years to bring it on the market. And what do we look for if we make an investment decision? First of all, team. This is the most important thing. Do they have the skills to build a product? Building a hardware is damn difficult. So if the team doesn't have the product, we're not going to make it. And do they have a relevant experience? It's very, very important for us as an investor to see whether the team has built something before. So we don't invest into companies who are building the first product. They have to have some kind of history. Prototype. Do they have something which is working? So they need to show something, at least a functional prototype. It doesn't have to be nice, doesn't look nice. Now we have an investment to a team who came from Palestine. And since they don't have access to the tools, they built their first prototype from duct tape and plastic pipes. And this is quite amazing to see that if this prototype is used on a smartphone, it can read all the letters and give that feedback in Braille language. And this is built from duct tape and the plastic pipe. Is there a market? Is there something new? If it's a product which already has 100 times on the market, we're not interested. So it has to be something new and something innovative. And of course, from an investor perspective, we would like to see if anyone else is considering investment. So now we have also companies who raised in a pre-seed round over 100K. And for us, it's a very good sign if somebody else other than us are willing to invest into the company. And this is more like a gut feeling. We look at the team and kind of try to evaluate, are these the people who are going to raise at least 1 million? So you cannot really tell. You kind of look at in the eyes and try to see whether you believe or not that these guys are going to raise a round. And what's the valuation, of course? So we invest up to valuations of 500,000 euros, so we don't go above 500,000 euros. And valuations very, very often are a question of negotiations, as always. But we have like certain limits. So this is a typical hardware startup life. These are all the problems that a hardware startup has to solve before going on the market. So if we start with minimal viable product, you have to have a software, you have to have a firmware, you have to have a bill of materials, you have to have a Gerber files to produce it, you have to have the CAD files, you have to design a product, you have to think about if there's product market fit. And it's a lot harder to find out if you're building something physical. Software, very easy. You launch your first version, put it on the market, see if people will download. You cannot do it with hardware. So you have to build your first 10, find customers, get their feedback. So it's a slow process. When you go to the fabrication, and then it gets really difficult. So it turns out that you can build prototype very many things, but you cannot manufacture them. So there's a quote by another accelerator in China, and where they say that no startup will survive contact with factory. And this is absolutely true. So if you have your great product, you go to the factory, they say there's no way we can produce it. And you start from the beginning, literally. And there's so-called China effect. So everybody wants to manufacture in China, right? More or less everybody. China effect, it's an interesting word. It has many, many meanings. One of the meanings is that usually if you order something from China, you don't get what you ordered. If you want to work with Chinese factory, you have to go there and actually be there. They say it usually takes 6 months to get yourself settled in, to find a factory, to start manufacturing. And another thing which is called China effect is that very often your product is on the market in China under a different name before you actually get your own product. So also have to think about that. So we suggest our startups usually to do the first batch in Europe. It's not that much more expensive. And when you go to the revenue or scale-up phase, and this is where it gets also difficult because you actually need money. So if you want to order your first 100,000 maybe or 10,000, you need to pay the factory up front. We're not going to give you a loan, so you need to pay them. How in the hell you can pay them if you haven't sold any? So it's quite difficult. This is a typical software startup life cycle. Half of the things disappeared, right? I'm not saying that building a software startup is easy. It's definitely not. But me, as an investor, have to take that into consideration. And that's the reason why you see, even in events like that, VCs on stage saying, we never invest into hardware. And that's why I'm also here. We're trying to also convert VCs into the hardware scene. There are more and more VCs who are also coming into the hardware scene, but it's still a very common thing. Last year at Slush, there was a VC panel, and there was on one stage 5 VCs, like 20 billion under management. And so somebody asked from the crowd, so who would invest into hardware? 4 out of 5 said, we do not invest into hardware. And that's the reason. What we also see is new business models emerging. Hardware as a service. So we have heard software as a service. Hardware as a service, one of the examples would be the Space Monkey. So what the Space Monkey does, they sell you more or less a web server with a hard disk in it. And on top of that, they sell you a service. So you have to pay monthly fees to get your data to the cloud. So it's a local cloud storage. So it's a completely new business model. So-called hardmium, which means that the hardware is a premium feature. So we all have gotten used to downloading free apps. And if we want to have special functionality, we pay for that. You can also do it with hardware. So there's an app with Pencil 55. where you can download a drawing app, which is for free. But this pencil is not just a pencil, it's very highly sophisticated technological equipment, which if you draw on paper, you see this picture on the screen of computer. But for that, you have to pay. The app is for free. Hardware as platform, for example, Leap Motion, meaning that there are developers who are not that much selling their own hardware, but much more waiting somebody else writing software on their hardware. So they're more business-to-business type of hardware companies. And hard data, maybe Nest is the most known example. We're not actually making money on selling you their equipment. Yes, you have to pay a couple of $100, but we're actually making money collecting data, analyzing it, and selling to their customers. And it's all about the production. The difference actually between software and hardware company in terms of traction isn't that different. So now if you think about these examples, whether you have on your website, for example, 1 million unique visitors or 500,000 visitors who actually stay for more than 10 seconds, or 200,000 visitors who actually click on something. By the way, nowadays, 10 seconds is a very good result. If somebody stays on your website page for more than 10 seconds, you have a very good website. Or 20,000 users who actually registered. Or maybe 2,000 very passionate followers, fans, or 1,000 paying customers. Now, if you have startups like that, showing you statistics, where would you invest? It's not the easy decision, right? So we would invest into these. And let me bring you an example. We had a startup applying this badge. We were building, I'm not going to tell about the product, but they had, what was the number? 40,000 followers on Facebook. And they had a YouTube video which had over 1 million views. And nevertheless, we decided not to invest because we didn't see any potential for growth. We didn't see any potential on monetizing that user base because they were all random people. So hardware is a cash flow business. And like I already told earlier, so if you actually want to bring something into the manufacturing, you need to have money in your pocket. So this is about the budget you need. So in the minimal viable product phase, building a prototype, less than 100K is completely fine. So we invest on 20K, we expect teams to build their product, to get the product market fit for that money, and also to do some traction. Should be enough. We have done the calculations, should be fine. The money comes usually either from friends, family, pre-seed investors like we are, people who have their own money. Now in the next stage, if you start designing for manufacturing, you need already a little bit more money. Turns out that you need tooling. So if you want to do plastic molding, you need tooling, which can cost you as far like 100,000 to pay for tooling is quite normal. You also need test benches. You need quality assurance systems. And the money usually comes from either pre-orders and crowdfunding or seed investors. And the last stage, scaling and going on a market, again, you need a little bit more money, but it's not about developing your product anymore. It's about creating the infrastructure. So if you're in a hardware business, it turns out you need to ship the products. You need customer service. You need infrastructure that people send you products back. And this is where the money goes. Mostly in marketing and into working capital, meaning hiring people. So we try to follow a lean investor model, which means that we do incremental investments into the companies. In the beginning, smaller investments and smaller valuation. And at the end, higher investments and higher valuations. We start with a lot of small investments, try to filter out the failure as fast as possible, and only invest into the strong teams. And this is something which our teams in Accelerator don't get. And it's very hard for me as a co-founder, I would say, to explain to them why we don't invest into them anymore. They've been 3 months in our accelerator. We run out of money. They have no traction. And they come to us, but you did invest into the other teams, right? So it's kind of hard to tell them, yeah, guys, but you're not going to make it. I'm not going to give you any more money. So this is the lean investor model, meaning that we try to filter out the failure, forget about the guys, and only go on with the guys who actually are strong teams and able to make it. We saw the acquisitions in hardware in 2014 and 2012. It's interesting that in 2014, biggest exits in the world are in the hardware. So Microsoft bought Nokia, that was in last year. But this year we saw Google, who bought Nest, Facebook bought Oculus Rift. And what's the last one? Yes, Apple bought Beats. So the biggest exits in 2014 has been in the hardware scene. Now, if we talk about investment funds who do invest into hardware, remember these guys. These are the most active hardware investment funds in the world. So remember the guys. But I want to bring out some of the examples which I have on a slide and why we're interesting. Waya is interesting because it's a new type of way of raising money. So they first went on the Kickstarter. They raised money on a Kickstarter and then went to the investors. So this is very common nowadays. You show traction, you raise whatever, million, maybe a bit more. You go to the investors and you raise another 10. Very common nowadays. SmartThings is interesting because Samsung acquired them after 3 years of starting, and this is something which never has happened before. They got acquired for 200 million 3 years after starting in hardware business. This is unbelievable. And SmartThings is a very small company when they got acquired. They only had 70 employees. So price paid per employee was more than $1 million, which is, again, something which wasn't possible 10 years ago. And Sigfox is another interesting example because we just started. We already raised 32 million. And basically, we're building a new type of communication which makes it possible to put any device onto the internet in 20-kilometer range of antenna, and the battery life is 3 years. And this is what I would call technology companies. Remember these guys. We are already in Paris, we're in Berlin. So there are already cities who have the network. So where does the growth mostly come in the coming years? Should be in machine to machine. So if you look at this graph, the tablets, PDAs, PCs are not growing that much anymore. The growth comes from machine to machine communication. And that's why I also brought out Sigfox. This is what they do. They make machine to machine communication possible. And if you look at the Gartner, what they think is, in terms of Internet of Things, right now it's the hottest topic in the world. I'm sure you cannot read it, but here it is. So right now, there's no other topic which would be hotter. Next year, of course, we're going to be not that hot anymore. That doesn't mean any revenue changes. That only means that people stop talking about these topics and we're going to start talking about our topics on left. And maybe just to wrap things up, so why do accelerators exist and who are they good for? So first of all, for angel investors. The typical angel investor is a geek, very often. They have made their money either creating their own company. In Estonia, we have very many highly paid Microsoft developers, Skype developers who invest money. So they are employees, but they make so much money that they have money to invest. What they do not have is time. So they cannot go and actively look for startups. Nobody knows that they exist. So for an angel investor, you would think that you have startups behind the door asking for money. No. You can say that I have money, nobody wants your money. There's enough money on the market. So for angel investors, accelerators are important because we kind of help them to fill the pipeline. And what other things which angel investor cannot do is the due diligence. They just do not have the time. So for example, for our current batch, we screened more than 300 companies. And it took us like 3 months and 5 people. An angel investor doesn't have that possibility. So the idea is that for them, startups coming from Accelerator is a very attractive way of getting deals to invest. And then same applies for venture capital firms. Now, venture capital companies usually don't have a problem with the pipeline. But they do have the problem that if somebody comes, they have like, the task of the accelerator is kind of to put the quality mark on a startup. Because they have gone through the program, they have done the work, they have graduated. So they have already shown that they can actually build a business. Technology firms, for them it's important to be innovative. And it turns out, this is the problem which I saw in working in Germany for a large company, that the company is so large that it gets hard to do innovation. An example would be, it took me, I guess, 2 weeks and 5 signatures to buy a USB stick. And I'm like, what? That's not possible. Next time I bought that for my own money. I didn't want to go through this again. So the bigger companies have problems innovating because they cannot make decisions fast. And that's why, instead of trying to be innovative themselves, they look for companies who do it for them, and they buy them. And usually if a company gets acquired, there's so-called founder lock-in. So the founders have to stay with the company for a certain period of time. So this is very common. So if Samsung acquires you, they say you have to work for me for the next 3 years. So they're not only buying your company, they're buying you, and they're buying your development team. So accelerators kind of, we also talk to Philips, we talk to Samsung, and they look at our portfolio constantly. And it's very interesting that, for example, Samsung is very, very actively scouting for companies. So they don't expect companies to go to them, they try to find them. Our startup founders, we see a lot of people who have great ideas. They are great developers. They are not great entrepreneurs. So they come to us and say, hey, do you have a cool startup I could work with? So usually the relationship starts that they work for a startup for free at the beginning. Maybe later on they'll get the equity. And maybe later on they become co-founders. This is a very typical case. That there are very many good engineers, but they don't want to make the step starting their own company. And of course, service providers, be it like Ceres or Altium, are interesting for Accelerator because we get the free tools, right? But they get future customers. So startups cannot pay for Altium. So Altium is a printed circuit board design software. It will cost you 6,000 euros for one developer license. And if you're a startup, how in the hell you can afford 6,000 euros, right? So Altium give it for free, so for startup companies. But later on, most likely, if these companies grow, they will come and buy your product. So this is it. My name is Aleksander Tõnnisson. We also are taking applications for the third batch, which starts in March next year. So come look me up. I would definitely like to talk to all startups or all the guys who actually have ideas starting something in the hardware business. Thank you.